couple of others, and I don't really know the names of them.
A lot of times they outsource the actual flying themselves to third parties,
Yeah.
or they may be based somewhere and they just get on a contract with.
Yeah, one of my former line service persons has been flying assessment 206 all over the United States, mapping.
206, you said?
Yeah. Little single engine.
Right. I thought that was a smaller one. No? Melissa, can you hear me? Oh, geez. Melissa, can you hear me? I think you're muted still.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Shirley, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Okay, I'm right now on my computer audio. I've got to get the conference phone set up, so I'm going to mute myself. And just like last time, it'll be through the audio will come through what they call the Kellogg Room audio. So I'll have to get that set up here.
Okay. I'll be back in a bit too.
Me too.
Okay. Mic check, we've got the conference room audio up.
I can hear you.
Okay. Gonna do one more mic check. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, and we can hear you too. Great, thank you.
You can have everybody attending tonight.
I haven't heard anybody who hasn't. I know Tanny will be here. Yeah, we got Shirley. Oh, wait, I'll have to watch me.
I just spent 4.5 hours in a small airplane maneuvering with 2 students. Finished the one lady last weekend. She got her certified flight instructor certificate, and then working with another lady. This Saturday is her check ride. She'll become a new flight instructor. Now put them on staff, and they make $50 an hour. So.
That's pretty good. What were they doing beforehand? Was it?
This lady I'm working with now, her husband's a captain with Horizon.
Okay.
And the other one, she worked line service. Her folks both mom and dad are doctors.
Oh, wow.
And she graduated from medical school back east and decided she wanted to become a pilot.
All that tuition money.
Yeah. Oh, there goes the gin.
All right, Paul, we have you hooked in. Paul, can you hear us okay? I think you're muted upon entry, so you may need to unmute yourself if you can.
Hi, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, Paul. Welcome aboard. Guess we've made it work.
Oh, great. Easier than my phone. Thanks.
Hey, Paul. Hey, Marv. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Not bad. I think we skipped June and July and went straight to August.
I was outside today for about an hour and a half over at the urban renewal site, and it was boiling. Like virtually no breeze. It was warm.
I think we got some rain coming in this weekend.
Yeah, this Saturday is supposed to be a soaker, apparently.
Yeah. They said chance of thunderstorms up against the mountains too.
Sounds like a fun flying day.
At least it cools off at the higher altitudes. That Pakistan aircraft that crashed here the other day.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, there's a Pakistan aircraft that crashed in Pakistan into buildings. Not a lot of people were hurt in the building, but everybody in the airplane died.
Yeah.
He hit the runway 3 times without having the gear down. And finally, the 3rd time, he got it up in the air, but then the engines were damaged.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So was it malfunction of the landing gear?
Operator error.
Didn't go over the checklist.
Yep.
Isn't that the first thing you learn is the checklist? I don't
Should
know.
be.
I've never flown. I haven't even tried to fly a plane, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah, there's a little acronym called GUMPS. Gas on a main tank, undercarriage down, 3 in a green, mixture, full race, prop, pumps on, prop forward, seat belts.
Sounds like you've done that before.
Once.
Just so everybody knows too, we do not have our webcam, so unfortunately I can't show Marv's pretty face, although he did get a nice haircut.
Acetylene torch and a mirror.
Cleaned up nicely. Meanwhile, I'm still a haggard mess. John Powell, can you hear us? Howdy. It doesn't look like it. I think he's trying to connect.
So what are your plans
Plans.
for the future? Are you planning on sticking around?
Me? You mean like leaving the city?
Yeah,
Where would I go?
I'm just wondering.
Jordan, can you hear us okay? Oops. Sorry, can you hear us okay, Jordan?
Thanks.
Melissa, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, Marv muted the room just by pushing one button, even though it didn't show it on the screen, so
Oh,
I blame him. Melissa, if you have, are you around tomorrow? I need to place a call to you if you have a chance. You're around Friday.
sure. Yeah, I have time tomorrow.
Okay, I'll reach out to you at some point. Great, thank you. Jordan, can you hear us okay?
There's the wool pullery.
Oh, yeah. Looks a little different, doesn't it?
Yes. Yoshida still owns it, right?
No.
Oh, you sold it.
No, the city has it.
Oh.
John Paulo, can you hear us? We see you're muted. Can you hear us okay? You gonna hang out by the flag?
How we you gonna do Pledge Allegiance there, Spanky?
Say we just forego it and we just say we still honor America, but it'll be double pledge on
See, you got a bad attitude.
At least it's an attitude.
You know, this is 3 in a row.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
loud and clear.
Hi, Sandy.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. How's it going with you?
Good. Trying to survive the heat. The AC came on for the first time today.
It was 91 in Portland today.
I saw 90 on my phone.
Sandy, is that a mocha frap that you're drinking? And why didn't you give us some too while you're at it?
Actually, I go grocery shopping every other week and I grab one of the passion teas and then I have the mix to refill it. And the cups they give you already have the pre-lines in there for how much is ice and how much is water and how much is the tea. So I just reuse the cups.
Perfect. Jordan, I don't think we heard a mic check from you. Do you mind confirming? Can you hear us? Can we hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Great.
Perfect.
I guess we'll let our chair in too.
That would be nice.
Uh,
Yeah, I'm working on it.
You're muted.
Actually, we're recording right now, so we're good.
Okay, here we go. We are ready. And at this time, I would like to call to order this meeting of the Troutdale Planning Commission for Thursday, May 28th, 2020. We could have roll call, please.
And Rennie will do it tonight.
Okay, Ms.
Yep,
Farrell, please.
Yes. Commissioner Whitturn,
Present.
Commissioner Wydilla,
Here.
Commissioner Mamoni,
Here.
Commissioner Prickett,
Here?
Commissioner Wilcox,
Here.
Chair Stephenson,
Here.
Commissioner Glantz.
Present.
Do we have also alternate member Allen?
I don't see him at this time.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Okay, great. And with that, we'll proceed. And due to audio difficulties, we will forego the pledge tonight. And we will move on to public comment. And is there anyone who submitted any written comments for the meeting tonight?
There were no written comments submitted to staff.
Okay. And is anyone dialed in versus Zoom to comment?
I believe the Zoom call-ins are going to be referring to one of our discussion items tonight.
Okay, great. And seeing no one here at the ranch, okay, we'll move on. And the next order of business would be a nomination for vice chair after Commissioner Rosenbarker's resignation. And so at this time, I would open the floor for nominations. Commissioner Prickett, please.
I'd like to nominate Marv Wydella.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Marv accepts that. And do we have any other nominations for vice chair for 2020? Okay. Motion to close?
I move that we close the nominations.
And I'll second.
Okay, we have motion and second to close. And so nominations are closed.
You need a vote, but
Yeah.
without objection, you could say.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and vote on that. All in favor of closing nominations for vice chair, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. We'll move forward and affirm the nomination that's on the table. All those in favor of Marv Wydilla serving the remainder of the term for 2020 as vice chair of the Planning Commission signify by saying aye.
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 All right. Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay. Congratulations on your sentence. Okay, and did everyone receive a copy of the minutes from the April 29th meeting?
Yes.
Okay, and are there any corrections?
I have one if no one else does.
Okay, Commissioner Wilcox?
Yes, on page 14, about the middle of the top paragraph, Dean Herford, his last name is misspelled. It should be H-U-R.
Okay. Very good point, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Wilcox, was that page 14 you referenced there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I did notice. Any other corrections? None? Okay.
I move that, do you have any?
No, I do not.
I move that we accept the minutes for April 29th
I'll second that
as amended.
as amended.
Okay, we have a motion and second to approve the minutes from the April 29th, 2020 meeting as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, great. We are trucking along. And now for the big show. Tonight's item is a development code amendment, regarding storage use in light industrial zoning district.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick before I dive into it, I do have to do a screen share. Before I do that, did everybody receive a copy of the memo? It should have been included in the packet that referenced basically the 3 changes that were being contemplated. Okay, I'm going to keep my comments relatively pithy and short tonight. The memo kind of speaks to it. The red lines are pretty straightforward, but I'll elaborate a little bit on how we arrived at the definition and kind of the consideration of placing it as a proposed conditional use for that. So give me one moment while I get my screen shared here and the rest of the document.
Yes, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you, but maybe it's because you're doing 2 things at once.
No, I think it's because my microphone is far enough away. Can you hear me better now? Is that better? Is that better?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay. Thank you thank you for calling that out before we went too far deep in there. Excuse me. Just one moment. Can everyone see okay? It's a PDF document with the memo for this on their screen. Everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, again, so talking really quick from the memo, this is a text amendment consideration. Originally, we were forecasting the idea of taking it to you for hearing on June 17th, 2020, but given that there was some concern expressed by some commissioners about the desire maybe to have that conversation prior to, rather than risk having decisions being made while a hearing had been posted, we are electing to postpone the hearing into July's, I believe it's July 15th would be that date for consideration. So an earlier version of the packet, which was posted online, not the one you received, that was amended, but an earlier version had suggested that comments could not be made tonight, but comments, suggestions for edits can be made tonight, and we should be okay then with being in compliance with the state. So feel free to get out the red pen if you so desire. In the meantime, I'm hearing a little bit of background noise for commissioners. Can you please make sure you are muted at the moment? That'll help with some feedback in the room. Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with definitions, and that is out of Chapter 1, one of the 2 chapters that is being looked at with this particular amendment application, and that is to create two new definitions here and to slightly revise another one. That is defining what storage is. And it should seem to be pretty self-explanatory, except we have not had a definition ever in the code for it. But storage is referenced throughout the code, but in the prism of how it's referenced, it's basically the safekeeping of materials and goods at a location which the principal use is not a storage facility, and its presence at a location is considered accessory. That is a very planning legalese way of saying that if you have material on property that belongs to you and is associated with your main use of your property, whether it be goods, materials, or vehicles or something like that, that is considered storage. And you are as allowed to put storage on your property, provided it's your own. So the distinction here when we're talking about storage facilities is that a storage facility is an establishment where the principal use of the property is providing leasable space where the material and goods, in other words, where storage can be rented out for leasable space. And in this particular definition proposal, we are saying may be stored by lessees in an outdoor, indoor, or portable setting. We go on to say that storage facilities can include residential and non-residential self-storage establishments. So just in case there was clarity's sake, what we have historically called mini warehousing, self-storage container, self-storage facilities, of which we have 3 currently in the city of Troutdale, they would be covered under that definition. That is the type of storage facility we're talking about. What it's not referring to, it is not warehousing for commercial and industrial purposes. And we go down then to the next page here, where we always had a definition for warehouse, which is a building used primarily for the storage of materials or goods for use on the site or later distribution. Warehouses shall not include storage facilities. So a warehouse is very much like what is just going on with a grocery wholesaler, where basically they take in product and they distribute it at a later point. They are the primary tenant, and basically their business is to store material and ship it out later, but they are not individually renting smaller spaces for purposes of lease, for rent or for portable purposes. Why that's important is that warehousing is currently an allowed use, but in looking at the case archive of how the city has handled what we call now storage facilities, the city has not wanted to historically have those in Troutdale. What's prompting, again, this code amendment is, quite frankly, a lot of business interest in this particular land use, and in this case, seeing whether or not it can be introduced without being overwhelmed. Previous discussions on storage facilities have always centered around, well, is it really the highest and best use? You know, they don't have a lot of employment tied to it at the actual facility, and we had industrial land at the time. We really wanted to make sure that what we had designated as a job center, a place of industry, we allowed those properties to develop. And since the last time the city seriously looked at storage facility as a use, the city has seen a great influx of industrial development that has generated thousands of jobs. And now with the remaining acreage that we have left, or the remaining acreage that we have potentially redevelopable, is it appropriate to relook at it, especially when the market, based on our inquiries as a staff, we've seen a lot of demand for that type of use. So we're bringing it back for this body and ultimately for council for consideration. Going into the next page, which is we're now moving into chapter 3 in the code, where we talk about what we allow as a permitted or a conditional use in our development code. Light industrial is the zone we're talking about. On the map, light industrial is effectively those smaller industrial properties that are immediately proximate to I-84. We're talking about properties that are adjacent to the Troutdale Airport, actually a couple of airport properties, although I don't believe the port would be in the business of self-storage or storage facilities as narrowly defined like this. But there's the I-84 Corporate Center that is partially covered by this, as well as properties off Harlow Road over where the levee ties in with I-84 right on the Sandy River. So those are the areas we're talking about, a very limited geographic scope within the city. There's also a small area right off historic Columbia River Highway, well west of downtown as you get over toward the animal shelter. That is also an area that would be affected by this potential zoning change, or text amendment, I should say. So when we're looking at that zoning district in trying to determine permitted or conditional use, given that there has been some hesitation in the past, and given that this has been a difficult topic, and based on kind of the line of questioning and concerns articulated at the last meeting, we have gone ahead and suggested that you consider it to be a conditional use, where this body would then have the ability to really review these applications on a case-by-case basis. Now, conditional use obviously lets people still do this use, but they have to demonstrate based on those 6 decision criteria in your code that says this use is going to be okay for this specific location. So what may be okay on Harlow Road may not necessarily be okay at the I-84 Corporate Center, for instance. So that's why you can be a little bit more particular and examine the facts of the property you're considering, as opposed to a permitted use, which is a little bit more open. And if you were to do a permitted use, then you really have to think about, well, do you want to place limits on siting and characteristics when you can do that through a conditional use permit process a little bit more effectively and provide maybe a safer way of reintroducing this use. One final thing I'll say before I'll be happy to answer any questions for you. Right now, you already have a storage facility, as this definition suggests, in this zoning district. You have a self-storage facility right at Harlow Road and Graham, right at that intersection right there. That is currently a non-conforming property. If that property were to sustain damage or wanted to make significant changes to recalibrate itself or wanted to redevelop, obviously there's some restriction because of the runway right there, but they would be prohibited from doing that. By at least reintroducing, at the very least, a conditional use allowance for it, that affords that development the chance, if it ever sought it, to potentially redevelop or reconfigure its operation, whereas they are not afforded to. They really are hamstrung at this point. So that's certainly a good reason to consider it. There are some other properties where storage or the possibility of storage facilities are investigated or have been kind of on the fringe of, is it storage or is it not? This provides some clarity for those properties to determine how they want to use or maximize the use of their overall site. So I hope I've answered a couple of questions you have, and I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, and I believe you'll want to do it commissioner by commissioner, just so we have a clean line of questioning.
Yeah, so how about we start with Commissioner Glanz?
And I'm going to leave the PDF up in case any of you wish to look at the pages.
Ready? First of all, thanks for the red line. That makes it a lot easier in going through this.
Sure.
I do have concerns in general with, I feel like we're splitting hairs a little bit, and especially when I look at the definition for warehouse. And we're talking about a building used primarily for the storage of materials or goods for use on the site or later distribution, but it's not storage facilities. Why can't a warehouse be a storage facility? Why do we need a separate definition?
Historically, how staff and frankly this body and City Council have affirmed the distinction between the two. In their minds, what a warehouse is a larger facility that is wholly used by one company to distribute goods and materials within a network or by contract to somebody. It's not the same as somebody who is not on the premises or not directly associated with that company coming in seeking to rent partial space within a warehouse. That is the distinction. You know, if there's a better term to use, we're certainly game to consider that. we're leaving warehouse alone and just adding that note there because warehouse is already listed as a permitted use in general industrial and I believe partially in light industrial. So that's why we were trying to be hesitant to not overwhelmingly change that definition, but try to draw a distinction where we could between that and storage facility.
I mean, I'm going to go back a little bit, that I still think it's splitting hairs. If I think of Amazon and I think of a warehouse, and I think of all the different vendors they have that they store materials for later sale, it still seems like we're carving out a really tiny piece. Accessory. Oh, and then my other question was on when we define, so we have storage and we have storage facility. It seems like it could also become confusing, and I wonder if it's possible to add like storage and the word accessory or something else there so that there's always another word next to storage, so it's always clear which one we're talking about, rather than having something someplace else in the code that says storage and it's like, well, which storage do you mean? Let's always have, if we're going to do this, have it be that each type of storage has a word that goes with it, just as a suggestion.
Either accessory or incidental or related storage, some sort of like adjective in front of it or attached with
storage,
it.
Subdivided, something that so that the word storage is never by itself, so there's never confusion as to which one we're talking about if we're going to start splitting the hairs. And then just as a small note on, what would this be, page 3-45, it's K at the top of the page, chapter 3.
Sorry, catching up with you, Counselor.
Yep.
Yep.
Where we have storage facilities, can that facilities be capitalized to indicate that it's a category rather than a verb, adjective, or whatever that is?
Sure, that's an easy fix.
Those were my starter remarks.
Okay, Commissioner Mamoni.
I'm in agreement with staff. I like what I see here. I like the segregation of uses, but I also agree with the commissioner that semantic as a value, semantic is important, and so maybe to differentiate the two, to add something else. One is storage facility. The other could be storage accessory use. Something that really does not introduce confusion. But overall, I appreciate the effort and the separation of uses here. So I'm in agreement.
Okay. Commissioner Wilcox. Commissioner Wilcox?
Oh, sorry, I had myself muted.
Okay,
there we go. Okay.
A couple things. Chris, you made reference to Troutdale Airport Storage being non-conforming. They added buildings there in the last few years. How was that approved?
Commissioner Wilcox, I think what I meant is that there's a private, not affiliated with the airport, there's a storage facility at the intersection of Harlow Road and Graham or 257th, the extension. It wasn't actually airport premises. Storage at an airport or an airfield is, because that's where that was located, was in general industrial. It was also tied with aviation or aviation related facilities. So that's how that would have been allowed.
No, that wasn't my question. I'm familiar with the public storage facility by the airport. My question was, when you said they were non-conforming, I was pointing out that they expanded on their property. They added buildings on their property in the last 2 or 3 years.
Are you referring to the public storage facility, not the one at the airport?
No, the one at the airport at the corner of Graham and Harlow.
Okay.
because that is a different zoning district. That would be in the general industrial zoning district, I believe. We can double check that, Commissioner, but I believe that's what we're referring to. And in that case again, we'd have to go back and double check to see how staff would have determined the land use for that. But again, short of not having a storage facility definition, I would be led to believe it is probably either a warehouse or a, given that Troutdale Airport is a public facility, probably a facility improvement. So we'd have to double check that. We can do that certainly before the hearing and confirm that.
Okay, you're still not following what I'm referring to, but that's okay.
Okay.
Pass for now. My other point is distinguishing between warehouse and storage. I mentioned at the last meeting that I was aware of at least one person that was essentially warehousing out of that public storage facility at the corner of Graham and Harlow. You know, there's UPS trucks delivering in there, and it's obvious there's products being distributed by that the person holding that unit. And I also actually have some personal experience with somebody doing the same thing over on the coast. I used to deliver groceries to a small public storage facility. People were running a food buying club out of it. And I'd drop the product there, and then the people would come in later and collect their products. So, a situation like that, you could have quite a bit of traffic that you weren't expecting. Somebody's actually using a storage unit as a distribution center. That's all I had. Thank you.
Very good point. Thank you.
Certainly, and if I may jump in for commentary, this is the point of this discussion tonight. If you feel we're really splitting hairs on this, if maybe the definition of warehouse just should be expanded, that's also a possibility. Again, this is just our first stab at what we think was a way that we could distinguish it, if it needs to even be distinguished. That's kind of what we're leaning on you all to determine, should there even be a distinction. But if you are not going to make a distinction, realize that it would be upending a little bit of historic precedents that had been set in how we evaluated those applications. And also, there's a pretty big difference as far as the utilization of a site between a warehouse, which can also employ dozens, hundreds, in an Amazon's case, thousands of people, and a mini storage-like facility, which may only need 5 or 10 people, if that. So I think that's one of the other distinguishing factors between warehouse and storage facility. A warehouse has a much greater potential at a regional job impact, which is called for in our 2040 Metro Plan. So just another food for thought. Again, no right or wrong answer. Ultimately, you're here to help us guide it and determine how the community is going to determine it.
Commissioner Weidel?
I would say a warehouse is controlled by a single operator, where a warehouse does not have public access to space within it.
That could be elaborated in the definition, potentially.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Prickett?
I agree with Marvin and Sandy. I do think storage needs to have like Sandy said, another word added to it, whether it be accessory or something. And I do agree with Marvin, the fact that the definition maybe needs to be expanded on warehouse, that it says it's not for public, one entity and no public access. Does that make sense? I mean, that's what I believe. That would make more sense.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else, Commissioner?
Not at this time.
Okay. And I would think some of this has got to come in as far as a design standpoint. You know, if you're having something that's going to function as a warehouse, you've got to make sure that you can logistically move the trucks and the bodies and all of those things around in that site effectively. I thought Commissioner Wilcox brought up a very good point that if you've got something that's like the Troutdale storage that's functioning as a mini storage and you're having deliveries and things going in and out of there, I've been on that site and that's not really what that site's designed for. And so I think, you know, that's something that we definitely have to take into consideration through all of this.
Commissioner Whitman, still to comment.
Commissioner Widmer, sorry.
It's all good. There's a lot of good coming out of this, but I do believe we do need some sort of definition between, we're not just splitting hairs here. We need to make sure that there is definition between the two. And I will agree with the other commissioners that not so much the storage piece needs more definition, but I think the warehouse needs a little bit added to it to get a little more clarification. I think we're on the right path with saying it's not a public forum. So, but we need something more.
Sure.
If I can add to, is that warehouses are permitted under this district outright. So in this same conversation about storage facility, if we want to define things a little bit further, then that could be a conversation of if that would fall right into the same permitted use as a warehouse, as the umbrella warehouse that we have now existing in our code. So warehouse itself, but I think as planners, when we met with some business owners, is that there's instances we would like to rent, business owners who own warehouses would like to rent it to another business. So in the form of maybe a shipping container on their lot. And that's different than what we would think what a warehouse is. And so this is a good opportunity also to define what warehouse means for us. Also, this opportunity for a storage facility or accessory storage. So then it's not the same, under the same umbrella. That's what I'd like to add to your consideration.
And thank you, Ms. Farrell. I would agree with you. I would also think, though, if you were going to have, let's say, a warehouse facility on a dead-end street that classified as how we're defining warehouse now, you may look at the design of that completely differently from a traffic standpoint.
Sure, potentially.
You know, planning on, 20 semis a day going out around that corner, I think you're going to design things differently than what you would if you didn't.
Well, keep in mind also, just because a use is permitted in a zoning district doesn't mean it's guaranteed. They still, any use that's permitted still has to go through plan review and development approval through the city. Part of that analysis is also not only looking at the site from a setback, building pattern, knowing where your lot and your impound lot might be, but also can the existing traffic facility, in other words, the road, handle that type of traffic? So getting traffic studies and analyses done are important. And bottom line is, if they can't make it work, or if the traffic in fact suggests, no, not a good idea unless you do improvements, that's grounds for staff to deny the application. So permitted doesn't mean carte blanche. You still have that level of design review and review from the other entities that polices that.
And I would agree, this has been like a stepchild for the city for a number of years, this whole issue, and it does need to be dealt with.
But to your several commissioners' points, expanding the warehouse definition will immensely help staff, because then we can really draw that clear distinction. So we welcome that contribution, that edit. I believe you have members of the public who may wish to testify or provide comment.
Okay, and at this time, we will go ahead and take comments from the public if there are any on this agenda item.
And if you are a member of the public, please state your name and your address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Tracy Brown. Are you able to hear me, Chris?
Yes.
Okay.
We are, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a land use planner, and I spoke at your...
Back you up just a second. Could you state your name and address for the record for us?
Yeah, my name is Tracy Brown, and my address is 17075 Fur Drive in Sandy, just up the road from you all. So I'm a land use planner, and I'm working with a property owner who owns some property in the light industrial zone. And so I guess the input I would provide is, I mean, I think I'm appreciating the discussion because there is some nuance in there, certainly, and having it clear is very important in writing code. You know, my initial review of the code, you know, we were of the proposed amendments, we're very supportive of that. You know, I certainly understand the need to clarify and the distinction between warehouse and storage, and the need to possibly add a word to just the storage itself. I mean, the scale of an operation may be something else to consider. You know, the small warehouse is probably different than a Amazon. So, you know, that's just food for thought, I guess, because there's kind of one definition to take into consideration all types of warehouse, all types of storage facility. But other than that, I think that, you know, I felt the definitions, you know, I've been a planner for probably 25 years. I felt the definitions were generally clear. I could understand what was trying to be conveyed, you know, but there are probably some tweaks that you might make for your own purposes. But I guess that's my general input at this point. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Okay. And Mara, did you wish to comment this evening? And just state your name and address for the record.
Mara, can you hear us okay?
Are you there? Okay.
I mean, we're not in a hearing, so we can also collect any comment by email if needed.
Yeah, she muted now. Or did you mute her?
No, she muted.
Oh, there she is.
Mara, can you hear us?
Yeah, if you're there, go ahead and state your name and address for the record.
Again, not a hearing, so
Right.
she'll have another chance at testimony.
Absolutely. Okay, so what we're looking at then is little definition refinement.
Okay.
And are you wanting us to do that, or do you want to do that and bring it back?
We can do that, and we'll want to bring it back for hearing. We do want to get moving on the amendment if possible.
Okay, so you're planning on bringing this back at a hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
The hearing we would schedule for July 15th. And again, hearings are precisely that. If we do need to make changes back, you can make those changes then. But the one thing that is important, again, when you're dealing with a text amendment that's affecting a specific zoning district, we have an obligation also to notify all the properties that are zoned that way. So we need to make sure that we can confirm that hearing date for the purposes of what they call Measure 56 noticing, because that has to get out the door sooner than later.
Okay.
Can I ask a
So I
quick?
guess I want to,
Sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
When, in the past, it seems like, I mean, we talk about how conditional uses, they still have to meet certain criteria. but when they come up, it seems like they're really hard to turn down. And I'm wondering if our criteria includes anything about job production.
Let me pull up, Commissioner, just the decision criteria so you all can just have it in front of you. Give me one moment while I do that.
Thank you.
Sure. If everyone see that I am on conditional use 6300?
No.
I still see the
Okay.
PDF.
Okay, give me one moment.
Yep.
I'll have to unhook and rehook. Okay, this is a PDF. It should say 6.300 at the top, conditional use. Do you all see that?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. The approval criteria are listed right here. That's the 6 of them that are applied no matter what the application. I'll give you just a moment to read it rather than me recite it.
Thank you. I don't really see much there that would talk about, I guess, economy or job creation.
One that you can maybe make an... Sorry, go ahead.
Commissioner Mamoni, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
The one thing I would say, Commissioner Glantz, is maybe what you could look at is that item F, and it's, you know, it's an extrapolation to a degree, but the applicable provisions of this code, that also refers to the purpose statements for each zoning district. And if you were to go back and look at what the purpose of creating the light industrial zoning district is, that may be a way you could look at it. Because the light industrial is generally supposed to have that lighter footprint, lighter impact on property. And normally that's considered in the auspices of traffic or pollution or intensity of the use on the site. But it could also, for some people, mean it's just a smaller facility in general, and as a result may have a smaller employment than, say, an Amazon or a FedEx, which are general industrial, which are much more intense uses on site, not just from effluent or production, but also from people. That's maybe one way you could look at it.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, and so we're looking at doing what to the definition that's written?
Can you repeat that, Mr. Chair?
What are we looking at doing to the proposed definition that you've written already?
What from the instruction that I believe I'm hearing, or the consensus of the group, what I'm hearing is that for the definition of structure, we would put an adjective there, whether it's storage. We would put accessory storage or incidental storage, some adjective describing it, and then doing effectively a word search throughout the rest of the code. And when storage is applied as a word, we clarify that. So ultimately what may happen is it's not just 2 chapters you're looking at, it may be multiple reference points across the entire development code. And you'll have a chance to review that to make sure that, because what we're doing now is not just looking at storage facilities, it's also clarifying what storage is across the board. We would also then look at expanding the warehouse definition to kind of accommodate the spirit of Commissioner Wydilla's discussion, that was also agreed upon, or at least that spirit was agreed upon by some of the other commissioners. So I think that would be what our marching order would be.
Okay. I'm just wondering if this is going to get more murky before it gets clearer.
Clear as mud.
Because you've got residential, non-residential, commercial, industrial,
Well, I think what we were trying
indoor, outdoor.
Yeah.
I mean, we cover everything except the big ones, really. It's kind of a broad brush.
Except the big ones, I'm not sure if you can.
Well, like Amazon.
Oh, Amazon came in as a warehouse.
Right. Okay. Everybody okay with that? Okay. So staff will come back with
More polished definitions and probably a expanded list of references across the code where those changes would be applied if needed to clarify that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, one moment, we reprogram.
And then you also talked about us writing design standards for those two.
Well, again, we have it listed as a conditional use at the moment. So conditional use gives you the ability to review it on a case-by-case basis rather than try to play the design wizard.
Yeah. Which we don't mind.
What's that?
We don't mind.
Well, that's a lot more work.
Case by case gives us something to do.
That's right.
Okay, on to the next one.
Okay. One moment while I just re-add the screen share again.
Here we go.
Forgive me, folks, I have about 15 windows open on my laptop, so I'm trying to make sure I get the right one.
That's all?
Just 15, yeah. I'm probably an amateur, compared to some of you all. Okay, the next course of action that we wanted to, or the next topic of discussion tonight was another text amendment, completely different topic, so completely different number, with regards to sign permitting. And we have not previously brought this up for you all to consider, but this is in the, well, this has been a object of disdain, quite frankly, for staff, is some of the standards that we have in place for how we route and handle sign permits, because we find it to be extremely cumbersome, extremely difficult, and extremely frustrating for those who apply. So if that's the staff feeling, then you can only imagine what the public might be feeling about some of our sign standards and process for how we handle review of signs. One thing that has changed since the time we had last adopted the sign standards, which was 3.5 years ago, or I guess it was 3 years ago, the city now has software that better integrates planning processes, i.e. a sign permit, reviewing sign standards, with building permits. So in the cases if a sign requires a building permit or electrical permit, that software effectively allows for concurrent review, which can dramatically increase the speed in which the city is able to review a sign. Our problem, though, is by our development code, we require what we call the Type 1 land use review, which means we have to generate paperwork like notices of decision, notices of application, and in some cases may have to, provide a 30-day decision time to it. What we're trying to say is, let's uncouple the Type 1 review procedure. We don't uncouple the need to get a sign permit, and we don't change the standards for reviewing a sign, but we just take out the land use review requirement for it from a procedural standpoint. It enables us, in other words, to do concurrent review, and we can do a sign permit within the building permit module. It makes for a much faster review. And in situations when a building permit or electrical permit are not needed, it still affords us the ability to look at the standards when we're reviewing an application, but we can get it out the door in a very quick period of time. It's a customer service delivery at the bottom line. So that's the first bullet point. The second bullet point is, I would hope to be a little bit on the common sense side. And if you just look around downtown, for instance, and I know a lot of people haven't been downtown lately, but imagine downtown pre-virus and hopefully post-virus. You see lots of portable signs, A-frames, sometimes temporary banners. If you can only imagine how many of them actually got a permit from the city. So why are we requiring a permit for that? That's kind of the logical question. So we're not asking in this text amendment proposal to get rid of the dimensional standards for it. We're just saying let's exempt the need for a permit. And if it becomes an issue from a code compliance standpoint, we can require or compel somebody to take it down if it doesn't meet just the base standards. You do this already a lot with all sorts of other things. For instance, you do not require a permit for a home occupation, but you have standards in place in your code that say what are the rules of the home occupation, but you don't charge us with getting a permit. So why are we requiring a permit for a portable or temporary sign, but not one for a home occupation? It's just kind of, in staff's estimation, that's kind of a common sense argument. And then in the third bullet point, it's just a very simple fix, increasing the sign face area from 10 square feet to 12 square feet. And if you think of a sandwich board sign, if you have a sign that's 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide with the sign area, that's 6 square feet. That's a very common standard for a sign. And if it's dual-sided, that 6 plus 6 is 12. That exceeds the 10 square feet that we have the limit on, meaning that for any type of sandwich board sign like that, if we're following the spirit of the code, we require a type 2 variance. That's just preposterous. So is 2 square feet adding to it really going to change or break anybody's spirits? That's really what we're asking for. So we're hoping that these 3 items here provide ideally some common sense to the application of this code, some relief for people who are just trying to, get the word out about whatever they need to get the word out, and not change the standards, just allow us the ability that if it becomes a problem, that our code officer can go out, investigate it, and take care of it that way, and not overburden staff, or more importantly, the applicant with a need to get a permit if really, do we really need one? And by the way, most of them are not getting them anyway. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair, and I'll be happy to, Irini and I will be happy to answer any questions. I'm sure Irini is chomping at the bit to offer her feedback too.
I guess the thing I would say before we start is why? Because it's the sign code.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the most debatable topics that we have. Doesn't excuse it, people are very passionate about this issue. With that, I will go ahead and start. How about Commissioner Wittering? Do you have any questions or comments?
I guess comment-wise, if we're really, nobody's getting the permits to begin with, we're not going to see revenue depleted from the city or anything else, right? I mean, the impact is from being permitted or not, at the end of the day, from a dollars and cents standpoint, isn't going to make any difference to the city, correct?
It would be negligible at best. And honestly,
Okay.
There's probably greater cost to the frustration of whoever actually is being told they need a permit, and it just buys us, in my mind, goodwill, which I don't think you can put a price on that.
Okay. That's all I had.
Okay. Commissioner Gland?
I have a couple questions. Like on political signs where there's, it's two-sided, there's, the person's name on the front or the measure and the measure on the back. Does that count? Like if it's, let's say it's 2 by 2, so it's 4 square feet on one side. Do we count because there's printing on the other side that's possibly visible as, does that make it 8 square feet? Or is it only like A-frames that are being counted? It seems like we're counting A-frames wrong.
Arini, if you have the quick answers to that, I welcome that. I was just going to double check the definition, but if you recall the answer to that, feel free to jump in.
I don't believe we hit them with size.
Irina, you're muted if you're talking.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was saying the sign face area here, we usually would do the display area. So then even if it's both sided, we just use one of the side.
Right. I think with the A-frame sign definition there, Commissioner, I think the double-faced portable sign, I think that's what's calling that particular type of sign into consideration there. I believe the same applies to the portable sign too.
Maybe we just, instead of increasing the size where we don't end up with 12 square feet, one-sided, you know, big things down on the corner there, but maybe we just change how we measure an A-frame, that each side is a unique sign. Just a thought. And I have one major concern with not asking for permits. And that's, how do we know how long a temporary sign has been up? If there's nothing in process, we get a complaint, how do we know that it's, you know, basically not there for the next 18 months versus, you know, they've taken it down every weekend so they can say, nope, it's only been up for 5 days at a time.
So in the past few months that we've had Joe, he's done a very good job at kind of doing an audit of all the temporary signs that are available, which is that's been put up, which is one of the conversations that we start having with this too. So I think our code compliance officer has been really on the ball about knowing where all the temporary signs were. He actually wrote up a lot of businesses for having temporary signs without permits. So I think in terms of making sure that they're not exceeding that threshold of the time limit, we have a pretty good fail safe in that. I think that's kind of like the other end of this, but we should, if we do decide to move forward with this, we would do our best to communicate that to everyone in the city, business owners and their business license applications, and residents in our Troutdale Champion and our website, to let them know that what temporary signs really mean under our code and how we would interpret that if they choose to put that up.
Many of the temporary signs you see around town too, Commissioner Glantz, are actually in the right-of-way, and private signs in the right-of-way technically are prohibited.
Correct.
So we've kind of, to Irini's point, with Joe Storgy, our code officer, being as diligent as he has been, if we get a complaint about a sign, a temporary sign, more often than not it's in the right-of-way, and Joe can remove the sign right away, no matter when it was posted.
I mean, just from a community standpoint, I worry that loosening a lot of the protections we have around an overpopulation of signs isn't good. It's just, it doesn't make Troutdale look good. It makes a community look bad when you got signs every place. And I know everybody experiences that during elections. That's kind of a separate time frame, but I do have concerns about loosening some of that. And then can you please explain a little bit more about how the software works and the decoupling? I didn't really quite get that.
Okay, yeah, sure. I'll try to clear it up. So right now, or the way it's been working, the way it was, when this was written, the code was written, planning, when you wanted to get a sign in Troutdale, planning would look at it, would approve it basically for design and dimension, can't regulate content anymore, but would look at the design and the dimension. And in some cases, some signs would also require building permits if they were affixed or required a foundation, and in some cases also electrical in case they were backlit or a cabinet sign or even had front lighting. And what has happened previous to this software is you get done with planning and then you go into the building permitting routine and go through that. In other words, before this software, we couldn't review signs at a simultaneous together. We couldn't do a simultaneous review. So that added considerable amount of time, delay, and frankly, frustration. This software, what it does is the way it's set up, it regulates it so you are able to do that level of concurrent review. But right now, the way the code is written, we're not really allowed to do that. And because we have to follow what they call the type 1 review, we have to generate paperwork as if it was like a site development application. We have to do a notice of decision. We have to do, in some cases, a notification. It's a very cumbersome process, and it's extremely frustrating for a lot of people if they are just seeking to put up a sign. And what we're arguing as a staff is that we can accomplish the same level of review. We can accomplish, we're not changing any standard. No standard is being changed. We're just being able to greatly reduce the time it takes to get full approval. Because in the applicant's mind, sign permit is great, but you're only halfway there in some cases.
So for all intents,
software
this is just procedural.
Yeah, it's mostly procedural. Yeah.
I do want to clarify another thing too, is that, so you are already aware that we were looking at the code and seeing some of the discrepancies that we had, is that there was kind of a misunderstanding that type 1 applications are over-the-counter applications. The problem with that is the way that our code is written and the statewide land use procedures is that any type 1 application, type 2, type 3 are technically called permits. And we've been referring sign permits as permits, type 1 permits, thinking that it's mostly type 1 as an over-the-counter procedure. The problem with that is if we put it under the planning type 1 application, like what Chris has mentioned, we are required as planners to really do the notice of decision, the putting it into our land use files as if it was a site 1 development review. So it's really not the same thing, because you might have a grand opening banner that's a temporary sign, and they have to go through the same procedures that they would for a site development review. So what we're asking, we keep it as a permit, but under the understanding of the same way that we would review building permits. So they're not subject to the type 1 typologies, but it's still under plan, it's under our development standards, and our sign code is not going to change just because it's not within this type 1 typology. It's really just to make a clarification that it's not a type 1 procedure. So then that way when businesses open and they want to have their sign ready to go, they're not waiting for a month for a completeness review and then another month again for an approval process. We usually don't take that long, but they're under the typology.
So there wouldn't be any notification anymore.
Yes.
So it is a different procedure.
It's a different
And again,
but it would still be a permit.
It would be a permit, but it would be a over-the-counter decision.
It would, yeah, well, yes, as long as you hit the standards, yes. If you don't, then we've got comments for you and you need to resubmit, basically. And that's what that software system allows us to do. That's the other beauty about using the software system rather than doing a type 1 review. A type 1 review means you submit something to us, you hope it's right, and if it's not, then we deny it and you're all the way back to square one. The resubmittal allows us to be that much more responsive and that much more effective.
In software.
Yeah.
So if this is a big project, let's say with the Starbucks that we have, and they've submitted sign permits along with their site development review, it's a type 1 site development review that they applied for. We still notified our reviewers because it's still a type 1 site development review. We didn't notify the reviewers of the sign application. We wouldn't notify the reviewers under the sign application, but they're aware that the Starbucks are coming in because there is still a notice of to property owners and to the reviewers as a type 1 application under the site 1.
But if we happen to grant a sign permit to somebody that puts a sign on an easement or something,
We review that. The software still reviews it.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't negate any sort of requirement to collect information from an applicant. What we're saying is that we just have a much quicker ability to turn around an application. And again, if it involves electrical or building permitting, it can be reviewed at the same time. And if they're showing that they're on an easement, planning says, nope, resubmit, relocate, and let's get it done.
Typically, it takes longer to get a sign permit than it does a building permit.
It can, and it's a source of frustration. And it particularly, you don't want necessarily current conditions to completely muddle the waters, but especially in wake of the current situation, as people are starting to try to open themselves up again, or if you have a new business moving into a space, I mean, if they have to wait 4 to 6 weeks to get a sign permit, that's not a good look for the city. Particularly when we have, forgive the expression, we literally have the technology to get it done faster. And again, this was a source of frustration from the community well before the pandemic ever hit. So this is not as a result of the pandemic, but this is certainly highlighted and articulated more in these days. I mean, keep in mind, your whole development code, for the 4 of you that were on the development code review for 3 years, your charge from council was to make this thing more friendly and more conducive and easier for the public to use for a development purpose. This is it's an additional step in that spirit. It's staff's estimation.
Commissioner Mamoni? Any comments, sir? Who's there? Commissioner Mamoni?
Yes.
There we go.
My apologies. I thought my name, I wasn't sure. Well, again, I appreciate the effort of the staff. I'm all in favor to remove an unnecessary obstacle, to remove bureaucracy when unnecessary, when become difficult to regulate. But on the other hand, I think there is also the responsibility when we do simplify the process, not just for the applicants, for the citizens, but also for staff as well, that we are sure we do not compromise the integrity of the process and of the organization. So in general, I appreciate really. I'm all in favor. Obviously, there are a couple of questions I think some of my colleagues on the commission already have pointed out. I'm not quite too familiar again with the code, so I'm a little bit concerned, and concern is a strong of a word right now, but with this language, the way that I read it about portable sign and temporary sign will be exempted from requiring sign permits. I don't know, what is your definition of temporary sign? Does the temporary sign is specific to the term of time is allocated to it? Is it just because it's not bolted to the ground, engineerically structured? So in any case, I think there should be some sort of mechanism, whatever it might be, by the software, that gives an account at any time about how many temporary signs are up there. Even more if, and I don't know, it's a big if because I'm not familiar with the code, if the code specify a specific allotted amount of time for temporary sign. In some respect, political sign or temporary sign, even though in all the codes that I've been working with over the years, political sign obviously have a chapter by themselves. So again, I'm all in favor. I think that if you find mechanism, a way to minimize the discomfort to all of us, it is an achievement. But a couple of questions here and there.
Okay.
Commissioner Mamoni, just on the screen, if you have the screen share up, we highlighted where temporary sign is. That's how Troutdale Development Code defines temporary sign.
So it does not specify that the definition of temporary sign is not specific to the amount of time allocated for a sign to be on the ground. It doesn't say for a week.
In the situation where it's, say, a political sign or a sales sign, there's a deadline for when the sign has to be removed after the event.
Okay. Okay.
And then I think portable sign was another question you had. We have that definition up here too, in case you wanted to see that as well. That's up here at the top that I'm highlighting right now.
So if I may, again, this is just a question to try to understand, let my mind work a little bit more. If we do not have, if you're suggesting, I'm pretty much really in favor of what you are recommending, but if we are not using, or we are not requiring a sign permit for a temporary sign, and the temporary sign is not dictated by the amount of time it is there on the ground, how will we know when it's too much? How do we know that it's a temporary sign indeed while it's not a temporary sign? Maybe it's been there for 14 months. And maybe this is a trivial question. I apologize if it is that, but those are the questions that come to mind right now after 30 seconds of conversation.
I think I'd like to add that a lot of the temporary signs or portable signs that was written up by our code compliance officer included daily specials of restaurants. And then there were also some that was held by the church about locations of pickup and drop off of their donations. So they're not always about an event. And then in terms of the temporary sign aspect of it, it's really something that does change every day for them, but it's something that's not affixed to the ground. So there was Instant Coffee that came in and they had their daily specials on an A-frame, and they came in and they wanted to put a sign permit. With the sign permit that we have, because it's a type 1 application, they need to do a land use cover sheet where it shows, a site plan, not really the most suitable umbrella that they fall into. So we advise them to just draw up where their sign is going to be located, depending on where their building is located. But that's to give you some perspective of where we're coming from. We're not saying, like this is just for every grand opening banner or every sale sign. There's a lot of portable and temporary signs that does need to be up for businesses that happen every day.
Great, thank you.
Right, and I guess I would say to that is, how do we handle that so that, you don't end up with an A board every 3 feet?
Very much the same way we talked about how temporary signs are often located in the right-of-way. A-frames are almost always located in the right-of-way. And quite frankly, the only reason why you see them is because, again, our code compliance stance is complaint-driven. So every portable sign you see downtown, I shouldn't say every, most of the portable signs you see downtown are A-frame signs. And by the way, A-frame is considered to be a portable sign. It's an umbrella term. Are in the, not even the city right away, that's a Multnomah County street facility. So bottom line is, if there was an issue, Multnomah County would contact us and say, get these things out of here, but they just let it happen. We're just saying the naked reading of the code says you can't have a sign like that in the right of way. But the nice thing about a portable sign or a temporary sign is it can move quickly, it can be removed. That's the whole point of why they are going to be okay with it in a right of way. Having the standard in the code still matters though, because if we ever got to a courtroom where it became an issue where the code officer pulled it and it was repeated offense and said, I'm citing you, we have something to fall back on. But with the current stance, and this is actually, it's not even current, it's been a long time stance of this city from a code compliance policy is we're complaint driven. We don't yank signs until somebody calls to complain about it. And then we look at it and we review it. The other thing I would say too is that we also have standards for the number of signs you can have on any one property too. So the concern about the proliferation is certainly merited. But rather than get into the granular details of trying to determine was this sign put up on September 1st or September 15th. What we're finding is when we're having a proliferation of signs, it's usually more than one temporary sign or more than one A-frame sign on one property. And people are less concerned about when the sign went up and more concerned with the number of signs that are on the property. And that is an effective code response that we can do. Because if we were really to put a timer on every single temporary sign that went up, we'd be doing nothing but sign permits. And that's a tremendous consideration you have to do. I mean, how much do you really need to regulate it? In other words, but it's a fair and open conversation. You guys are the arbiters of this. Do we care as a community to truly regulate this as rigorously as you want? You can do it, but I will tell you, you don't have the resource to do it from a staff capacity to do it. So how do you regulate it, and how do you keep that quality of life component to make sure you are not signorama?
Well, I was going to say, and this is just a personal experience, in some other areas, I have to get a sign permit annually. And in that permit, I have to do the site plan and what type of sign and size and color and all of those things. And I have, 30 days, a year that the sign can be up.
And who regulates that?
The city does.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm saying is, I'm saying, okay, from April 1st to April 15th, then October 15th to October 30th, my sign's going to be up. And if the city happens to see it any other time, they can take action. But I have a permit for it, so they know what it is. I'm not saying it's an efficient way, I'm just saying
That's another way to do it. Sure.
Yeah, it's a way to do it.
Yeah.
That way, they look at the application, they're like, we don't like the color of the sign, it's out. Or anything else. So it's part of the permit process. Just a thought. Okay, moving along.
Yeah,
Pardon
can
me?
I ask, for your sign permit, is it under the same kind of typology of a type 1, or is it more of over-the-counter sign permits that you submitted and planning reviews it and give you an
It's more of a type 1
okay.
than an over-the-counter. It takes, if you're going to have a banner up, it takes you about a month to get approval.
And who does that help? I mean, that's kind of the larger philosophical question. I mean, are you not aggrieved as a property owner? Because that's kind of the feedback that Arini and I get when we tell people what the permitting requirement would be for something like that.
Well, I personally think it's a pain in the butt.
Right.
But I also know that it is a very sensitive and a statement of livability for a community, really.
Yeah.
What they allow and what they don't. And I also think about even with some of the type 1s, it's like you allow X sign to go in and it's brighter than the guy next to you and he's all upset, and I don't know. I think there's something that can be done. I don't know that there's anything that's going to be a magic bullet for this one.
And this is kind of harking on some of Marini's comments, and forgive me, I know you want to get to the other commissioners, but just in taking inventory of the complaints the city has received about signs, a majority, I wouldn't be able to assign a percentage of it, but a majority of the complaints have to deal with multiple or obnoxious signs in one location, and in almost every circumstance, the sign is in the right of way, so it could be dealt swiftly with.
But would you have to take them all out?
I'm sorry?
I mean, if you were taking signs out of the right of way, would you have to take out the whole block?
The way we would approach it is our code officer would visit the offending property, explain what the standard is, and say, look, yes, so-and-so has it also down the street, but they only have one, and that's really what is allowed in the code. You're allowed to have one portable sign in downtown. And by the way, nearly all of the sign complaints we have are just on one street, as you can imagine. You're not having a lot of sign complaints in Old Sweetbriar Farm or Sandy Palisades. It's usually on the temporary or portable business signs that can be, and in most cases, are signs that are located in the right-of-way that can be dealt with very quickly if need be. But usually, again, we try the education and compliance route before we go penal and take a sign down. And in most cases, they're portable and temporary, so the problem gets dealt with very quickly.
Can I ask, is this primarily A-boards? Sounds kind of like that.
There's some A-boards, it's actually like flags and you know, the banners that are a little bit more, you know, collapsible. You can kind of erect them very quickly. They're kind of that mesh material. That's been a lot of.
Feathers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been that.
And feathers are a different thing by footage standards than an A-board is.
Sure.
I think those are a little harder.
But more often it's like, well, you told me I can only have one sign or one portable sign, and here I am with one portable and my neighbor has 4. So that's again, there's not a clear majority on any one particular complaint, but that's more often than not a complaint here.
And you can't talk to your neighbor because you'd be inside the 6-foot rule.
Well, nowadays, yes.
Yeah. Okay, Commissioner Prickett?
You're muted, Commissioner.
Sorry. Being that we haven't had a code enforcement officer up until recently, and temporary meaning temporary, we've had stuff that was supposedly temporary and became permanent. And that's not, I mean, I just don't want it to become permanent. Because to some people, temporary means temporary, doesn't mean temporary. Just means I can have it here. Or I can do, even if it was in the right of way, they still do it. But being that said, we haven't had a code enforcement officer, and being complaint generated in the past didn't always work. And
Okay.
that's how I mean, basically that's how I feel. So having a permit would be a way of controlling it. So it doesn't, so someone doesn't have to wait to call someone or wait for a complaint to have it taken away.
Okay. And so if you're a proponent of a permit, are you a proponent of refining the process some if possible? Did you catch that, Commissioner?
Yeah, I caught it. Let me mold that over a little bit.
Okay, okay. Commissioner Wilcox?
Okay, I've got a couple things. Looking at the original document next to the red line, and I see under paragraph A, the last sentence is application for a sign permit is processed as a type 1 procedure. And I was just wondering why that was shifted down into A/B rather than being struck through entirely within paragraph A. But my other major thing is under the new B, an application for a sign permit is not subject to a land use application procedure. Why do we even have to tell someone something isn't required? But when you get into that, there's thousands of things that aren't required. So I'm just wondering about that whole deal. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Wilcox, just to answer the first part of that question, it was more a legibility thought, like you have a permit required section and then a procedure section. I mean, honestly, it really makes no dime difference if you want to retain it all in section A. Staff just felt it read easier that way. Okay. Regarding the second part of your question, what we wanted just to make abundantly clear so there was no concern, because even though, well, you have sign standards baked within your development code, we wanted to be clear that yes, it's contained or housed in the development code, but in this particular case, in chapter 2, when it talks about permits required and permits requiring a type 1, 2, 3, or 4 procedure, in this particular case, for this particular chapter, that the ability for the city to handle a signed permit application does not require a land use procedure as outlined in chapter 2. A permit is still required, a review still happens, but you can also do it concurrent with other permits that are managed outside of the development code. I think that's how we were trying to articulate it. And we welcome any way it could maybe be said better, but if you feel it's not needed to be stated, that certainly can be considered too.
Okay. Commissioner, I already talked to you. Commissioner Glantz?
You'd already called on me.
I know, but you looked like you had another question, so I just thought I'd nab you quick before we made it the rest of the way around.
No, I'm pretty good right now, thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Waddell?
No, I think staff is on the right track. Simplifying it, most of the sandwich board signs are businesses, and they're only out on the hours that the business is open. And in that fact, that's a temporary sign. And the study that staff is doing to simplify the process for them and the applicant, I think is the right step.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can staff just get a clarification?
Sure.
Take a temperature of the room?
It's warm.
Well, I'm sure. It's 78 in here. We actually have the door closed. But as veterans on the commission know who went through the comprehensive update sign, this was a very difficult chapter to make amendment to. And there was discussion back and forth about whether a date range or time limit should be applied to temporary signs beyond the political or sales signs, whether temporary signs in general should have a time frame tied to it. Several of you brought it up tonight, but I think for the purpose of getting a text amendment application ready, we would want to know, do you want to re-look at a time limit for temporary signs or a method of limiting temporary signs to, as Chair was describing, maybe you do an annual thing and you are restricted 30 days to have a temporary sign. In other words, do you want a timing and limitation framework baked into this text amendment too? You can do it now, or you can direct staff to do that now and consider it, and you can just say, throw it out upon review at the hearing. Maybe it doesn't work, or refine it at the hearing. I mean, you have the hearing still to make the amendments, because ultimately it's not your choice. It's going to be the council's decision what it wants to do with this. But we can add it now, but we would want that direction from you tonight. And given that some of you brought it up, we want to make sure we're giving you an amendment you're comfortable with considering.
And I'd love to have some kind of date range, but I don't think it's reasonable to do. And to Marv's point, having, a lot of businesses that put out their daily specials, I'm fine with that. But what I would like as kind of a CYA is to have some kind of permitting process on a lot of this, just so that gives us a way to know what's out there and a way to also enforce the spirit of the code.
I guess the question I would ask is, when do you think a sign should come before this body? Or do you?
I would see, that's one of the things I worry about removing it from a type 1, and I'm willing to try that as long as we have some kind of permitting. But I could see where a sign goes up and it basically, I put my A-frame up, and for whatever reason or whatever sign I put up, it blocks my neighbor. And because my neighbor didn't know it was coming, that can make for discord.
And I guess I'm not thinking so much about A-frames as much as I am even larger ones.
Well, those two, yeah. But I tend to think of those as coming as somebody's putting in a new business, and we would have all those other, you know, electrical or building, you know, permits, other things that go along with it, and the notification. But yeah, I do worry more about the, you know, people just making a new sign, and it blocks somebody else, or somebody has a problem with it. It doesn't. There's not a lot of room there to mitigate it. So at least having some kind of permitting process, to me, feels like a halfway in between, kind of meeting halfway. Speeds it up, but still gives it a little bit of flexibility.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm with you on that, Tenny. Once we go down this road, I'm afraid it's gonna, I don't know. It just, for me, I'm like Sandy. I mean, it would be hard for me to understand if somebody puts a sign up next to my, like you said, in front of my business and I didn't know about it. There's got to be another way to do, like you said, some kind of permitting. But I don't have an answer for that part of it.
Well, okay, and I guess I look at it, and I do agree with staff. There's kind of some categories here that you got to look at. You know, how far do you want to go with a board sign versus how far do you want to go with something bigger and more permanent? And probably my fear is with something bigger, if we take the public out of the equation, that could come back on us.
But the majority of signs the city deals with right now are type 1. So while we have mentioned that there was a notification and therefore an appeal, most appealability when notified, most signs that the city handles are actually do not require a neighbor notification. But if you're talking about, as you said, bigger signs, I presume you mean permanent signs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Permanent signs often, okay, let's take a fixed sign to a building. I mean, that's going to be tied with a building setback or a building's, you know, general dimensional standard. And so when it gets reviewed, it would also be reviewed in the context of, you know, is there an impact to a surrounding property by the affixing of the sign by staff? It also gets reviewed when it's affixed like that. It gets reviewed by our building folks. If it is say a monument sign or a freestanding ground sign, it has to follow building setbacks. You know, staff would do an analysis and determine that there is no clear vision issue, say for a car coming in and out of a driveway. That level of analysis is still done by staff, and that happens right now. But in most cases, unless a variance is being sought, there's no neighbor notification for a sign like that already.
Right.
What we're saying is that for those two particular cases that we called out, for a portable sign and for a temporary sign, you're applying that same level of staff review and therefore staff-generated paperwork, which takes a considerable amount of staff time, not to mention the applicant is waiting around for a staff decision. For those two particular cases, are you really going to apply the same review standard as you would a permanent sign? That's really what we're asking at that point. You still have dimensional standards and obligations for those types of signs. And when they are in violation, the city has every ability to mitigate it, but when you're applying for it, are you applying that same rigorous test? And again, that's the community value. If it matters, that's fine. But we're bringing it to your attention, and we're letting you know from a staff and from an applicant perspective, it has been a source of ire, and that's an accurate statement.
To add the
Who was that?
forward discussion, it's not the notice of application that's really cumbersome. It's really when a sign application comes in with their dimensions and their application form and their land use cover sheet. is that because it's under a type 1, we have to do a completeness review and then issue a completeness letter and then start the review that way. So there is an extra additional step that we don't believe is usually necessary for sign permit applications, because the nature of sign permit application is not extensive as a site development type 1 application. So a completeness letter and completeness review is not necessary.
We've had sign applications where the review takes less than 5 minutes, but the paperwork takes 2 hours to generate.
Mhm.
That's, in our mind, madness. It's a waste of your staff's time, quite frankly. That's our vantage point of it, but again, it's ultimately the community's expectation on what you do. And your concerns from the commissioners of going a bridge too far, they're completely valid. You want to make sure that you're not opening up a Pandora's box. We get that. These are the types of good questions you need to be asking us and yourselves now of that, to make sure we're not going a bridge too far with that. So we welcome that.
So all signs are still regulated, but it's the process you want to change.
It sounds like we are really making things difficult, especially for some of our local business owners, and the time it's taking to do this, correct?
Well, not only that,
Yeah.
Commissioner, we're having people that just bypass it because they know historically the city is driven on complaint driven, so why should they get a permit anyway? I mean, again, if the sign meets the dimensional standards, are we really losing sleep over the fact whether or not they got a permit if the standards themselves have already been met? And then you got to ask the question, can we just as a staff not articulate or show or email what those standards are to a person who wants to do a temporary sign and entrust that they will do it? And if they don't do it that way, or they don't adhere to the standards, then they are liable, and our code officer can take care of it.
So previous commissioners' concerns where we're blocking one business is blocking another business, then that would probably be out of code, correct? If it's not on their property or if it's in the mainstream, then the code compliance officer would just take care of the problem, correct?
Yes, yeah, and by taking care of the problem, usually it means attempting to converse with both parties, trying to get an agreement to where it's settled, rather than have to write any sort of citation or remove the sign right away. That's always been our approach, or that's...
Yeah. Permanent signs still need to meet the setback requirements too. So they're not able to just put that just where they, in front of their property. They still have to meet the setback requirements that we have.
Yep.
And in terms of not the temporary sign mission, but as a type 1 permitting discussion, is that if we get a sign permit application and as planners we see right away that they're missing items, under kind of a building permit module, we can require them to resubmit their materials as soon as we see that, and it's a quicker turnaround way. And for them to do a complete resubmittal in the way that planning does that, in that way. So they can submit missing items under the software that we have as the building module for permit.
Okay. So I guess, if I have an A board and it's on the sidewalk, it's in the right of way, so technically it's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow. And so I think some of this almost comes down to, what do we want to permit, what do we want to allow, and what are we going to enforce? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I guess I don't understand the distinction between permit, allow, and enforce. And I mean, enforce would be complaint driven. I appreciate that. And I like not necessarily allowing just because it's being done, because that still gives us an out if something becomes a problem and too many people start taking advantage or it just looks bad. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I guess. Commissioner Wydilla?
Yeah, if the sign obstructs or if it's a hazard, then it's not an issue, it goes.
Right. And I would say you can pull that. I guess the one advantage to a permit is then they have no argument that they didn't know what the rules and the standards were because they're in the application.
Question, if code was 100% correct, would it look bad? If everybody was following the rules down there, everything looked good, because it seems like we're all hung up on the A-frames, the portable, the temporary. But if it was all within code, what would it really look like? Is it possible to look bad? Because that's what I'm hearing from other commissioners is what is the look? What's the physical eye appeal?
I guess I would say we don't allow signs in the public right of way. And so to have everything be legal, we would have to allow signs in the public right of way.
Right, and a right-of-way, keep in mind, we're mostly thinking in this prism with these types of A-frames, mostly on the historic highway in downtown, right? Although you have some in Stark Street, and there are a few in residential areas too, but you know, if everybody was following the letter of the law, there would only be a handful of businesses that actually would have the capacity or the ability to put a sign on their property because their storefront is maybe set back, like an alcove. For instance, a pizza place in downtown is an example. It's set back about 6 or 8 feet off the property line. So they could have one, but another business that has the business right up to the property line technically couldn't. So short of what Chair Stephenson was saying, unless you would, each sign got a right-of-way permit, and in this case it would come from the county because the city doesn't control its own Main Street. Yeah, that's the only way to kind of keep that continuity of what has been existing. You know, the idea of having signage like that is admittedly designed to catch eyes, but ideally not being obtrusive or obnoxious and properly scaled and regulated to create a Main Street feel, not to overwhelm and be obnoxious. And really the gentleman's or gentlewoman's agreement has always been with the county that, yes, it's the county right of way, but as long as it's not an ADA issue or you're not blocking anybody's accessible route, I'm not going to raise a stink about it.
I think you have a pretty good relationship with them that way.
Yeah.
Commissioner Mamone?
Yes, thank you. Because the commissioner asked this question, which is very intriguing to me actually, it started to trigger new thoughts. So it's intriguing the question about if the rules were applied 100%, what would the urban fabric image be? But which is very important, obviously. My question is there a limitation on the number of portable sign and or temporary sign that we allow for each site or for each business to have? Because that a proliferation of that, even if it is within code, might generate an urban fabric or an outlook that is not, welcoming and is counterproductive.
Okay, you want to take it?
Unless you had a comment to add to it.
No, go ahead.
Well, if you guys have your screen still up, and given that we were kind of talking about downtown, I'm referring to signage within the central business district. So what it says here is, in addition to exempt signs regulated by the code, provision of the section, so they can have wall signs, projecting signs, portable signs. Here we're talking about maximum sign face on one sign face. You know, again, that's where that 10 and 12 square feet that Commissioner Glantz was questioning about. One portable sign is allowed per business. Temporary signs, again, gives the dimensional standards.
One
temporary sign is allowed per street frontage. And again, that's been the crux of when we've had code complaints about signs, has always been the number of signs per business, not placement of them, or whether they were permitted or unpermitted.
Okay. You know,
So-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, just a brief closing consideration. It seems, while I'm really, and I emphasize again, I think you did a wonderful job here. I am all in favor for remove obstacle, but maybe to me at least, personally, obviously I don't know how my colleague feel about, but the issue of portable sign, temporary sign, the fact that you have for temporary sign, at least it seems to me, you have tied the definition of a temporary sign to an engineering requirement more than to a definition of time. And the fact that you seems to suggest, and I'm gonna be very cautious because you maybe do not suggest that, but it seems to suggest that for a temporary sign exemption from sign permit, it could escalate in something that is unintended. While I appreciate to try to be dynamic and to try to be of help and to try to be because also the aid of the softwares and technology to be much more dynamic, there might be unintended consequences where if the model that we are studying right now is taken to the extreme elevation, it might, and again, that's why I would suggest maybe a little more conversation, maybe more example, it might generate an image that is not exactly what we had in mind originally.
Commissioner Whitburn raised his hand.
Commissioner Whitman?
Yeah, if we were that concerned with the number of signs out there and what it's looking like, why don't we consider putting in the verbiage that they could have one temporary or one portable sign, but not one of each?
Okay. And we're just gonna go up. Would it help if we just didn't permit A boards at all? They were open.
Oh, meaning we had no permit requirements for it? You then run
Seems
into
to be the most popular one.
where you would run into issue then is the scale of it, because there are some large A-frame signs that are out there.
Okay.
And I think you would want to make sure that you want to keep it to scale.
Okay.
So I don't know if staff would be,
Okay.
yeah, but a fair question, yeah.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, is there a reason that we couldn't separate temporary versus portable? I mean, when I think of a church sitting out donation signs, why aren't those portable? And then we could put a time limit on temporary signs.
Can I address that?
Sure.
One of the things that we also see with temporary signs is, and you all have seen it, especially at the major intersections at, say, 257th and the Historic Highway, or Stark and Troutdale Road, or at Cherry Park Road and 242nd, you have banners that are up there. You know, banners put up by organizations or schools or whatever it may be, promoting an event or something like that. That is technically a temporary sign.
Right.
It's also, in most cases, placed in the right-of-way, but that's another code headache too. But nonetheless, I think the idea of temporary sign there was, at least as originally written, was yes, it's an event in most cases, and then it can be removed in a certain period of time. Whereas a portable sign, to Commissioner Wydilla's point about, yes, it's temporary in nature, but it also goes away at night. It's a temporary sign, but it can be used repeatedly over and over and over again. And, you know, do you need a distinction? I don't know, but all I can tell you is that's kind of where the intention was originally. But if you're not going to apply any sort of time standard to a temporary sign, then
It becomes a permanent sign.
right. Or a portable sign doesn't need its own category. It's just a temporary sign at that point. Except if you want to regulate the standard of a banner.
I kind of like having a distinction where portable, the one that, you know, they bring out every day, in order to do that, it has to be portable. And that could make temporary signs, you know, sale-driven, event-driven, that type of a thing. And that might give us a little bit more clarity in terms of what we're looking at.
Is it a situation, much like we had with the previous discussion, where maybe the definition of temporary sign needs to be revisited?
I think we could do that.
I'm sorry, I'm scrolling up to that.
Okay.
And that just, it gives us a way to make sure that the huge business blowout sign doesn't last for 18 months, even though it says it's temporary, to actually make it temporary in nature, but yet having portable for the A-frames, the church drop-off signs, the things that are truly put away at night. It kind of speaks to a different category, I guess.
You know, with the portable signs in Troutdale, sometimes the east wind takes care of that code enforcement for us too. Then it's Wood Village's problem.
They end up in, Wood Village. Okay. I guess at the end of the day, the good news is we have businesses that are looking for sign standards.
We do.
It would be worse if we didn't have businesses.
That's true.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, because it was mentioned before by one of the commissioners that when I think of temporary, I think of what's the temporary, time limit. And before we kind of had a problem defining that because, I mean, there's some signs that are up for a couple hours and they're put away every day. The coffee stand in the morning puts their specials out. To me, that's more portable. And then the temporary sign could center around events and sales and that type of a thing. Just a thought.
Okay.
Okay.
What do you need?
So just to make sure, staff has its ground covered. Rini and I are going to come back to you in July with a more refined definition on temporary sign that speaks to what Commissioner Glantz was just saying.
Okay.
The confirmation or clarity as far as the 10 versus 12 square feet, I believe it was talked about, though, in those specific standards that a A-frame sign would have two separate sign faces.
Right.
As opposed to, say, just a political sign, which would be measured differently, for instance, or a lawn sign.
So can we do that as a discussion item at that time?
If you wish to have a discussion item, we could entertain it then in June.
Okay.
But then we wouldn't have, because of sequencing and notification requirements, you wouldn't have a amendment until August, or a hearing until August.
What do you guys think about that?
So the question is, can an A-frame be considered two sides rather than one? That's what the question is?
No, that wasn't really the question. The question was, do we want them to come back with some refinements as a discussion item or as a text amendment hearing item, right?
Are you ready to consider a text amendment for July? We're not even talking about June now.
Yeah.
But if you're not ready for July, if you want to have another work session or discussion like we're having tonight, we can do it in June. It just means you can't formally consider it in a hearing until August.
Right.
That's what we're saying. But if you're comfortable with us making those changes and then considering an amendment, we can do that amendment in July along with the one we just previously discussed. And you do have a hearing scheduled for June, by the way, so that would not be the only thing you have on the docket.
That's okay. How do you guys feel about that? Commissioner Whitmer?
Yeah, I'm good with staff coming with text suggestions. And then, because the worst case, pardon me?
As a type 4 item?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Glantz?
I'd be okay with coming with the type 4 if we can spend just a couple minutes maybe making sure that we're all thinking the same thing.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Mamoni?
Yes, I concur with my colleagues. I think it would be worth to spend a couple of minutes. We raise a lot of questions while, you know, there are subtlety in the definition and subtlety in interpretation, but I think there is always value about, even briefly, to be sure that we nail it down. So I concur with the two previous commissioners.
Commissioner Wilcox?
I'm good with July if that's the question.
Yeah, for a type 4 for your, on this issue?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I agree.
And Commissioner Prickett?
Yeah, as long as we get a chance to be all on the same page.
Okay, so let's see if we can all get on the same page.
And how do, are we getting on the same page still tonight? Because again, if you are going to go with the July meeting, if you're hoping to be on the same page in June, I'm concerned, the staff's concerned about, because we have a state notification requirement, they're going to require a draft amendment.
Right.
And you would not be able to make edits at the June meeting. So you can discuss what concerns you have in June, but you would not be able to make those amendments or edits until July. You run the risk of a hearing outside of a hearing. So
right.
As long as the rules of engagement are understood.
I think my thought was that we kind of cover tonight, just recap, to make sure that everyone understands and hears in the same way.
Yeah, we're pretty much going to have to finalize it tonight, kind of thing. Okay. So if we're ready to do that, we'll proceed forward. Is that everyone's feeling? They're ready to do that tonight? Ms. Prickett?
Come to me last, will you please? I have to think about it.
Keep in mind, you can always make an amendment or a change to what staff's proposed at a hearing. It does not have to be a finished product.
Yeah, I know.
Clarifying that.
I just personally, when we put text amendments out there, I feel like it's like, this is what we think is it's just me personally. I would think when we do a text amendment, we think this is a good idea.
Sure.
Commissioner Mamoni? That's okay. Sure, everyone wanted to go. It sounds like most of them want to go.
Okay.
Okay. Everyone want to do this tonight? We all good with that?
Let's see how far we can get.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see.
Okay. Okay, here we go.
All right. Do you wish to do this page by page, or do you want to just land on our red lines, or how would you proceed with this, Mr. Chair?
Let's go through the whole thing.
Okay.
Because that's what we'll be faced with there.
Okay.
But highlighting what the changes are.
Yeah, we'll be putting notes in, annotating.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Starting with the A-frame sign definition, because that came up. Right now, a double-faced portable sign. Again, so it references portable sign, which is defined later in the definitions. Shaped with an A-frame, 2 signboards. There's standards about making sure that it's not permanently secured. So again, that speaks to the portability of it. Where the sign face clarification comes is not in the definition section, but further in as far as what the portable sign standards are. So you're not going to find that 10-foot, 12-foot concern in the definition that comes later. Were there any changes to the definition you'd like to make here?
Any changes to the A-frame definition?
No, because it already says that it's 2 signboards. So to me, that's separating out 2 signs.
Right. Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay.
A banner sign is defined as a sign made of fabric, other non-rigid material, enclosing framework. In this case, it is not a general category like a portable or a temporary sign. A banner sign speaks to the material of the sign in this case. So even though we haven't mentioned banner signs by name, most banner signs, at least that we come across, are considered temporary. But again, it's not a sign category like temporary or portable. Just calling that out in case there was a question about that. And if you see anything that you wish to flag, or if in case we're skipping over something, what I'm trying to do is hit the highlights of part of our discussion.
Yeah.
As we're hitting.
Do you want a definition for feather signs?
For what?
Feather signs?
I don't know what a feather sign is.
Feather sign would be the ones where it's got a small post that goes into the ground, and it, you know, will say like espresso or free Wi-Fi on it, and it kind of blows in the wind a little bit. It's made out of
Just saw it up there.
kind of a, I can't even think of it, a mesh material.
Yeah, it's a mesh.
You know what I'm talking about now?
There's a prime
Yeah,
example.
a flag.
Yeah, there's a prime example of one. A hair salon in downtown has put out feather signs. That was one of the ones that we've had headaches about.
Usually about 10 to 12 feet long and about 2 feet wide.
Yep.
It's kind of the standard thing.
They have a base. They're designed to be portable. They furl and unfurl, but they are big. And to the point of Commissioner Glenn, sometimes they do block use of surrounding business.
So what were the headaches that you ran into, just that we didn't have a good category to put them into?
Well, I think what we would have done is we, in light of not having a category, we considered a flag effectively, because if you think of a flag, it has the closest similar definition to it, and the code permits staff or the director to make that interpretation. In addition, quite frankly, it was in the right of way, and we actually, I believe we leaned on that to mitigate that, but from time to time it comes out again.
I would think from reading the flag definition, it would probably help you have a feather sign definition.
No.
Okay.
Okay, we can research it.
Okay.
We can research
You
it.
guys okay with that?
Yep.
Okay.
I know, Brittany's probably gonna smile. I know Marla in our office would love that definition. That's been a headache for her. It's not.
Feather?
Yes, that's been
I can get you one.
a problematic one. Again, similar to kind of banner sign, we define lawn sign, and again, here, it's the composition of the sign, not the category of the sign that we call out there. The lawn sign is effectively, as you see, virtual wall-mounted sign, so it can be that, but that's really your political sign. That's how we would interpret that.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know the ones with they're air driven and they flap around
That are-
waving their arms and to draw your
Inflatable.
attention? Do we have a definition or a,
Well, we're on the I page, and I'm not seeing an inflatable sign. There may be a reference to it later on in the chapter.
Nice.
Commissioners, I don't recall.
because that's another thing we might want to think about too. Because those are
Just go ahead and
tall.
add, we'll go ahead and add the note, and we can always go back and remove it if we find it later in the chapter.
Okay, thanks.
There's certain standards about prohibited signs and signs that cause distractions, basically, fall under that category. I think that's how we've regulated that in the past. Permanent banner sign, Arini, do you recall, have we ever come across that? I don't think we have.
Haven't received an application for a permanent banner sign.
Yeah. Put a question mark here on that. I'm not sure what they were referring to on that, but we've never come across that. Permanent sign's pretty self-explanatory. Portable, again, here's kind of one of the two primary definitions that we approached with you all on this.
I think the portable sign definition is fine from my perspective.
Okay. Go ahead. I can't hear you. Okay, sign face area, there was a question about that. It basically, because this is one where it's actually gone to the Supreme Court what a sign face area is. So this is a very legally defined definition. I highly recommend you do not change that unless you want to draw the attention of the outdoor advertising industry and a whole bunch of other people who usually pay attention to sign permit changes, the real estate industry. They're not fun. Temporary sign?
A sign that is not permanently attached to the building structure. Not intended or designed to be placed permanently. Can we put in an example? Would that be appropriate in a definition?
An exhibit or an example?
Yeah. Examples.
Sure.
And that's
I
where
think we did mention this includes banner signs or signs. So then that way, is that what you
Right.
mean, Commissioner Glantz?
Yeah,
So
anything
something
that you want to kind of catch all into that.
time, because I think we really want to capture the time essence of temporary signs, right?
I was
So
gonna say
signs that
event-driven.
are, yeah, so event driven, so something like a grand opening sale or a community drive or an event. to
Yeah, if you say
be added.
event-driven, I mean, any of those would be, that would qualify. It's something that
Yeah.
has a timeline. It's not
Okay.
something that is, today from, I suppose, okay, so here's an argument or a question. If I'm putting out a sign that says from 2 to 6 p.m., this is our happy hour special, does that become an event sign?
No, because it's not specific.
I'm
Yeah,
asking the question.
Yeah. Good point. I think the difference though between those two is when you
Can you speak up a little bit?
you have a directional sign versus an event sign.
Sure.
You know, I'm talking about the church drop off. To me, that's directional.
Could be. Could be. Yeah, a lot of it's interpretation based too. We have to remember that as well. And not just interpretation of staff, if it ever got challenged, interpretation of a judge. So we'll spend some time with that definition in particular. So we'll try to really bone it up. And again, we'll do our best to stick the landing, but if something needs to be added or amended, that's what the hearing is for too. So we'll try to get it as close as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Any strong opinions on merging B back with A and just keeping it all together, or any changes that we need to make on the language to B from Commissioner Wilcox's earlier comment?
Yeah, so this is where, do you want them to be a type 1 or not?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess before I got into the details of it, more the layout, and do we need to
Right.
call out that it is distinctive from that?
he brings up a good point of not saying what you don't have to do, you know, if that stays.
I have a question. So are we saying that all signs would no longer be subject to type 1 or just some signs?
All signs.
So if I put in a, I'm the Burger King and I decide I want to have a new sign, I would no longer be subject to type 1.
You would no longer be subject to type 1. However, you are still required to get a sign permit. But what it means is, and I think Marini mentioned it earlier, if Burger King comes in with a sign, and let's say and I'm just making up a number, let's say the sign was restricted to 32 square feet, and they came in with a sign that was 36 square feet. By letter of the law, technically, if you follow a type 1 procedure, we have to deny the sign permit application, assuming they have given us a complete submittal. So the first step is, hey, did you give us enough information that we can make a decision on you? Well, so let's say Burger King submitted plans, but they didn't actually include measurements on the plan. In the planning world, that means we have to do a completeness review of it, tell them you forgot to put the numbers, resubmit before we'll even begin reviewing the plan. They resubmit the plans, we deem them complete, we produce a letter of completeness, we do the review, we find that their dimensions are done, and then we deny them. And then they have to reapply and go through that whole rigmarole again. And in having the permitting software, and considering this is also a sign in this case that may be requiring a foundation, so a building permit. Well, foundations actually are no longer covered, but let's say it was an affixed sign to the wall. It requires a building permit to be attached. We're saying, let Burger King apply for everything at the same time. Let the building permit tech know what the planner is looking at too, and let the planner also be able to coordinate with them and say, here's what I'm missing. They gave me something, they didn't put measurements on them, but I need them to resubmit these plans. That can be done in a matter of days, if not hours, depending on the caseload, as opposed to having to generate those additional documents to do it. So they, as they say in our speak, they wait revisions. We basically are waiting for the revisions of the plans that reincorporate the numbers in there. And then once we have it, then Marini or whoever's reviewing the plan can say, oh, there it is, it meets code, or no, look at it again. So there's always still a check. And then at the end of the process, a permit is still issued. But then that permit is also issued, and it doesn't have to then go to building to wait for their permit. And it just is a much cleaner, faster process. And it is just less burden on the paperwork for the city.
I'm just thinking like, you know, IKEA Troutdale wants to come in and they want a sign, and we just don't end up, the public doesn't really know about it until it happens.
But again, most signs that Troutdale currently runs through, unless there's a variance request. So an IKEA sign, if you're having something like an airport way sign where you have this 100-foot tall triangle in the sky, nothing in our code allows it, so they would have to apply for a variance because they really, really want that sign. The public's going to be notified of that because that's going to require a hearing based on the variance asked for. It's the degree of that says this is way out of whack. So by eliminating the review procedure, unless it triggers something like a variance application, that's still going to be covered in the development code standards. The standards of the sign still remain in the code. We're just talking a procedure now.
I know.
So if IKEA does come in, they will still be subject to a site development review, and something as significant as IKEA would most likely go through a type 2 application, which requires a public notification. And most projects that are that large usually involve elevations, and those elevations of where the building, how the building will be faced, include signs. So that's kind of, if that gives you a peace of mind, no big project can come without the public knowing anyways, because there still is that site development review requirement that they have to complete.
Yeah, typically, unless they're just putting in a sign on its own.
But the sign
and it
still has
meets
to.
the standard.
Right, if it meets the standards, again, nothing we have talked about tonight, we haven't even gotten into, are you comfortable with the dimensional standards? Where we've talked about timing and all that, but the dimensional standards, this commission, again, the majority of you who were here 3-4 years ago, spent a considerable amount of time with dimensional and performance standards of each of these signs. We're not suggesting you touch them, and the minute you do, you are going to trigger every sign watcher in the metro area to your meeting or to your hearing when you have it. We have never had a complaint in the 3 years that I've been with this code about a dimensional standard or performance standard of the sign.
Well, we try.
The complaints we get are on the permitting process, and that's what we're trying to ask for your help in solving. The dimensions have never been questioned.
I agree, and it's, the whole question is how the process is made.
And just, you know, I'm trying to ask the questions. I'm not trying to be a stick in the mud.
No,
And
you have to think about every possible.
And to be
angle.
honest with you,
Sure.
do I trust this staff with any of these decisions? Absolutely.
Right.
And then I think back to a staff years ago, would I trust them with those same decisions? No. Would I trust the next staff with the same decisions? I don't know.
That's why we're here.
Right. That's why we get paid.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Wilcox, do you have any preference on the AB situation since you were the one who brought it up?
Yeah.
No, whatever works for you.
Not anything I think warrants changing. This confirms about the location since that came up. Again, all signs shall comply with the building setback standards of the underlying zoning district. At one point in your call, we've had 2 applications in the last year and a half where we had a building, a monument sign that wanted to go closer to the road. So there was a variance request for a setback standard. If you guys continue to remain comfortable handling it that way, that's fine, but that was also one that has come up before is, hey, but, if you are going to take, the typology, if you're going to take the procedure out of a type 1 review, then you probably want to maintain the building permit setback or the setback matching the building, because then if it does need to be reviewed, then this body can review it.
Okay. Everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
And construction and lighting standards here, none of this has really ever changed.
Please don't mess with the lighting.
No, we're not going to mess with lighting tonight. No. Lighting will need to be tackled one day, and today's not that day.
I spent way too much time.
Okay, sign-faced area, again, some clarification beyond the definition. Again, tread lightly on this one. I would not, or staff would not recommend changing this at the moment. But I think that gets into the details of, on that A-frame in particular, to talk about that. Exemptions, and that's kind of one of the heart of the matter is, can temporary signs and portable signs be considered exempt signs? Here are the signs that are currently listed as exempt. Public signs placed in a right-of-way, obviously. Directional signage, enter the drive-through here or there. Single or historic marker, kind of like the plaques for the historic buildings, if you will. Signs located in the inside of any building, do not mess with that standard whatsoever. That is a judicial case away from the Supreme Court at the moment. Do not touch that.
Municipalities that regulated that.
painted areas on a wall that are designed to be decorative or ornamental. So actually, this one came up recently. Does a mural require a sign permit? Technically, it does, because a mural is not a decorative or ornamental feature to highlight an architectural style. Or, you know, if you paint your sign on the wall, that is still technically a sign. So understand that that still is looked at.
And what this came up to is the Troutdale storage sign that's painted on the building.
Yeah. Window signs as part of the inside display, again, related to the other one about signs located inside the building. Signs not exceeding a square foot in size or a fixed display or a residential dwelling unit. Pretty common sense. Holiday lights and decor, obviously. Aha, inflated sign, inflated or inflated device bundled together that floats in the air individually or collective is 5 square feet or less in the sign area. So those figurines that are used by an airflow duct that kind of flap, you know, that's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
No, it's more like,
It's really like smaller balloons, what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Why they can't just say balloons, I don't know, but that was, again, a lot of this chapter was written by our attorneys, not by staff.
right.
And talks about flags. I remember we had a very, very vibrant discussion on how big a flag was appropriate, lawn signs, and then again, here's where the two proposals are on the red lines for inclusion on that. What's prohibited, any sign constructed not in compliance, obviously no illegal signs, bench signs, permanent banner signs, which, okay, well, it was defined. That's answers why Rini and I have never seen it, because they're prohibited.
We go back to the portable signs and the temporary signs, L&M. Is that basically saying that they no longer need a permit?
Correct.
Yeah.
So even if we make our permitting process easier, it's not even going to catch these.
What we find is probably the majority, and I think that's pretty safe. If you look at the number of sign permits we've issued for portable signs, and you balance it with the number of portable signs you see, particularly in downtown, most of those portable signs never got a permit.
I'm not sure that just because they do it doesn't mean that we shouldn't at least request it.
Good point.
That's a community value judgment. Again, we'll do as the code prescribes, but I'm just in letting you know that's the reality of the situation. And more often than not, we find when business is open, they don't even bother to check to see whether or not they need a permit for something like that or not. I mean, we can, of course, articulate that. So that's really up to you all to figure out what you want to do with that.
I guess I'm not so much looking to be strict about it as I am to have it as a backup to where if there's an issue, we can say you don't have a permit and show that, yes, it is required and we're not, you know, making people crazy over it, that are making good judgments, but it does give us a backstop.
The only thing I would respond to that, Commissioner Glantz, is when people call to ask about it, and we actually had this discussion at City Council the other night with regard to RV parking and what the standards are. You know, it's one thing to have the standard in the code, and then, well, the city is just going to be complaint driven about it. But if we are, as public servants, are providing the response of what's actually in the code, and then the next question is, you mean I have to go get, you know, plop down $100 to get a permit to tell me I can put a portable sign in and out of my business? That's an uncomfortable conversation that staff has. It doesn't give the city, at least in our estimation, based on our interactions, it doesn't give us a good look. And it can affect the reputation, shall I say, of the city. It's something to consider.
If we had a no-fee permit.
You could do that, but keep in mind then, somebody's still reviewing it as a staff. Is that just a service that the city gives away?
It has been for years.
Does it make it right, though?
My opinion, that's what the general fund's for.
Okay.
That's just me. You know, it's part of what we do for people.
I mean, that kind of goes back to the bridge too far, where, I mean, if we're going to pull back and only do permitting versus type ones, and also, you know, totally exempt portable and temporary signs, I feel like that's too far.
Commissioner, can I just throw another hypothetical at you? Or
Yeah,
just not even hypothetical?
Yeah, no.
In the past fiscal year, so going back from July to May, we've had 9 code complaints about home occupation businesses that are operating outside the spirit of the code. And in 8 of those cases, that was certainly the case. And the only reasons they were being called in was because of disruption to neighboring properties. Mm-hmm. Why would we require a permit for a sign when we receive relatively little complaints about the actual signs themselves rather than the proliferation of numbers? And why do we not require then a permit for a home occupation?
So I've always had to file for when I did business in the city, I had to file even though I worked from home.
You apply for a business license, but we have home occupation standards baked into the development code. And we as a staff, when we get the call, what do I need to do to get a home occupation? We say, just a business license, and here are your standards in the code. Good luck at business. So there's no permit requirement.
Isn't the business license then covering that?
Yeah, wouldn't it?
The business license covers it, but when there's a violation, you have a business license violation and you have a development code violation.
Okay.
And what we're saying is the complaints that are related to signs that we have are not tied to whether or not the sign had a permit or not, but whether there were too many signs on the property or if the sign was causing an obstacle to begin with. It's just a greater philosophical question. Who is being harmed by a sign? That's the question I think we have, because I would argue from our staff perspective, we have much bigger headaches as a city in responding to significant complaints about home occupation violations, which do have an impact in residential areas.
Right.
And we don't require any sort of permit or land use review for that. We do have the standards, of course. And I think what we're trying to demonstrate as a staff is you still have standards to regulate signs. You're not asking to be thrown that away. We're just saying, what is the point of having a permit? Why stress over a permit and have staff take time to review a portable sign permit when you're not going to have staff look at a home occupation permit?
Okay. I guess for me, I don't know why staff's not looking at a home occupation permit.
That was a decision this body made as far as a values judgment. You didn't want us to look at it.
Okay.
And we're fine with that. We don't want to look at them. We want to trust our residents that they're going to be good neighbors, provided we have the staff. Why would that same level of trust not be afforded people wanting to put a sign affixed or with their business? I'm not trying to argue, folks, and I'm not the 8th commissioner, but this is a philosophical question, and it ties back to your general charge from council. You are charged with making a code and upholding a code and considering a code that can be developer-friendly, but doesn't throw out all the standards in the book.
Right, and I believe that's what we've tried to do.
I think you all operate in that spirit, you know, despite the passion I'm showing right now, I appreciate the questions you ask. Understand it's not from coming from the source of frustration, but this is gut check time. And what your staff is saying is that your staff spends a considerable amount of time on sign permits and, quite frankly, things that are minute compared to the larger quality of life issues that are affected by the code. And those issues, you do not require a permit. In this one, you do. Why?
I guess a lot of people are just very sensitive about signs. It's one of those things where you may not necessarily have people complain about it because it's not worth their time to figure out who to call and who to complain to. But when they look at it, it's like, you know, why the heck aren't they doing a better job of monitoring that? And that, you know,
Sure, it's a fair point. It's a fair point.
Go ahead, Mr. Wilcox.
I'm having a hard time understanding how you can have a temporary sign definition without a time frame attached to it.
That's what we're trying to actually do by having a new definition for temporary.
Right.
Yeah, we'll be happy to throw in or entertain one for you all to consider.
Oh, okay.
And understand, I think that's when I'm pushing back or offering that commentary, it's not because of the lack of a time restriction, it's more the need or the requirement to have a permit to regulate it.
Who was that? Okay. You guys are awfully quiet.
I'm with the no charge permit. To me, it's friendly. If we change the system to not be a type 1, it's still quick. So we're developer friendly, because that's the main impact to that type 1 is going to be on the people coming in and, you know, the businesses wanting to change their signs or get a sign up. But I'm hesitant to go too far. I'm hesitant to pull back on at least not having a permitting process that, you know, we don't have to necessarily be enforcing, but at least it gives us a mechanism should something or a situation where things aren't monitored well or something comes up. I mean, it's hard to plan for what can go wrong versus what we already know. And to me, pulling out the entire permitting process leaves us very vulnerable to what I'm not even sure, but it feels too far.
And for
Go on, sorry.
For me, I'm okay with put no permits across the board. Fundamentally, I just don't agree with, hey, we're going to have permits. We're only going to enforce it when we feel it's necessary. It just doesn't seem to make sense. And all the time that the staff is spending on this permitting for temporary and portable signs, it just doesn't seem to make sense. It seems like we are choking our staff down with unnecessary work. I totally agree with temporary signs having a time constraint to them. Let's just hold them to the code, hold them to a time frame, and we should be able to achieve our goals here, not choking our staff down with excess paperwork.
If the sign becomes problematic too, keep in mind, you can cite on a sign code violation, but you also have the nuisance code at your disposal. Any violation of the development code is considered a nuisance and can be abated through a nuisance procedure, which is in the municipal code. We have that leverage. So I would say, you know, as far as enforcement, even if you didn't have a permit to fall back on, you still have the nuisance code to call out a violation.
Okay, and I guess I would have to, I guess I kind of have to come back on the burden piece just a little bit, because we have doubled the code enforcement situation. So it's not like we're asking people to do more work with less resources. We have put more resources to this, so that things like this can get handled if necessary. But if we don't want to permit those,
Just one what do you call it? Open-ended question. If you're not going to charge for a permit, what is the incentive or what is the purpose of somebody even applying for it? if you're not having a
Understand the rules.
Yes, I'm sorry. Then you understand I can have this size of the sign, you know, this sign can be here, it can be here this time, it has, and then I guess for me, it's like, when there is a problem, well, you know.
Well, here's the thought though, because when we have a business like the home occupation, I'll refer back to that.
Okay.
When we call somebody with a home occupation, they get a business license, but they also get information from the city where we provide them the home occupation standards.
Right.
They know, they receive it. We have the same capability to do that when we get an inquiry about it. The businesses with their license renewals, with their license renewal paperwork, we can include a memo highlighting what the sign standards are for temporary and portable signs. We do this also with political signs, by the way. When somebody files for an election in the city, we tell them what the political sign standards are. We do not make them required, we don't require them to get a permit. That would be wishful thinking, actually, for political signs. But we give them the information so there's no excuse that they can make when they're violating the code.
Right.
But if I'm an existing business and I decide to put out some temporary signs, there's no mechanism in place that would provide that information.
I would just put them out, right?
You could put them out, and unless there was a complaint triggered to us, what would happen is Officer Storgy, Joe, would go down there, and before he would yank anything, unless it was, again, like an ADA obstacle or anything like that, would talk with the owner, provide them the information from the code, and let them know, here's really what the standard is. It's as much public education as it is enforcement. It's getting, the goal is compliance, the goal is not enforcement.
Again, then we're operating on complaint based, so.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
What, me?
No, I didn't hear what Commissioner Glantz said. I'm sorry.
Go ahead and state that again.
I'm just, I don't know that operating only off complaint based from an educational standpoint is, once somebody's already done something, then educating them at that point, I'm almost frustrated. It's like, I went and I spent all this money on this sign and, you know, nobody told me what the rules were. So now you're telling, I don't know that complaint based is the best way to go. On an educational way.
I tend to agree. I tend to agree. While, you know, my original sense was that I'm not concerned about the elimination of type 1. Absence of a type 1, land use type 1 does not imply to me absence of scrutiny. Well, there's gonna be scrutiny for a big sign like we are talking, Burger King, McDonald's, through building permit engineering. But I do have a sense too right now that portable temporary sign should not necessarily be exempted by a permit. And I think I said a permit, the word permit, because I think this is where it stems our concern and our confusion. What do we mean by permit? Because I think all of us have a preconceived idea what a permit would be, but maybe you stuff me in a specific way. I don't mean permit as a mechanism to charge, as a review process to be time consuming, to me capricious, subjective, inappropriate, long-term and demanding. I mean permit just as a basic mechanism to keep inventory, to identify potential issues, to regulate. That's all it is. It would take 5 seconds. I want to come for a temporary sign. Hopefully it's going to be, I don't know, 3 months. Thank you very much. This is the address. I don't think we need to go more than that, but I agree with some of my colleagues that to go completely without anything, you know, I know some time ago somebody said trust, but verify. And we know for those of us who have been long time in this kind of business, that good intention at the beginning when somebody, a developer, a business wants something, yes, they're ready to do everything and beyond what we ask them. But then there's always a rationale for which they could not comply. And so my request would be, let's try to identify and simplify what a permit would be. Again, I don't mean permit, at least personally, I don't mean a permit like a type 1 or type 2 staff report with findings of facts, demanding and not even charge anything. But I think essentially, if we do less than that, if we do less than a mechanism to keep inventory and regulate, I'm not sure we do a good service here. But again, this is a personal sentiment, so I don't mean to be disrespectful for those we disagree. I'm just speaking my mind. And so I tend to agree with some of the colleagues who say, maybe it's going too far, but maybe, again, to me, it's the issue, the roots of the concern of the confusion stems by the word permit. What do we mean by a permit? When we say eliminate a permit, we keep using it, but what is a permit? What do we mean by it?
A permit is effectively an approval of the city that something can exist. Yeah. At its heart. And I mean, I think certainly from a staff perspective, decoupling the permit process from the land use process and just still requiring a permit issuance is certainly a step in making our job and ultimately the public's perception of the city, that's a positive step. And bottom line is right now you require permits for portable signs and temporary signs. And it sounds like, I wasn't really counting in my mind, but it sounds like there's enough concern that as we move this text amendment forward, we will not consider those two particular items unless you want to bring it up at the hearing. But I think staff is more concerned with making sure we can decouple the land use fee procedure piece of it, because that'll be a tremendous step in the right direction. One quick note, just for clarification, I know Mr. Chair knows this, the idea of not charging for a temporary or portable permit review can't be done through this ordinance. It has to be done by resolution from the city council. Correct. So that would have to be a separate action that gets taken. So if there's strong feeling about that, then what you would want to do in recommending an approval to city council is you'll want to make a side statement and recommend that as a separate resolution. Right.
Mr. Chair, I agree with Sandy, and sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. Sorry, but I do agree with the other commissioners that we need some process other than complaint driven, because complaint driven doesn't always work. By the time that complaint gets added, then again, the horse is already out of the barn basically, and they don't know the rules. They come in, they put their sandwich sign up, but they don't know the rule. So I agree that we need some kind of permit, whether it's paid for or not, but we need some kind of permitting process for inventory or for just regulation.
Okay.
All right. Is that kind of a consensus? Most of you? Okay. Giving a nod there. Any comments? You guys are wearing out.
The subsequent sections of the code where we talk about just what was redlined, I'll want to skip ahead, and I'm getting short on battery life, Mr. Chair, so I may have to defer to your computer before long. When we talk about the portable signs as part of the original ask, again, the 12 feet from 10 feet on the sign face area, the cumulative area, that's where that concern was. So you'll see that red mark there, as well as, and this is the sign standards for signs within commercial and industrial zones.
Is that a deal breaker for anybody, the 10 to 12? That's okay with that?
And then it's also listed in signs within the central business district.
Right.
So those were the only other two markups you had. The rest of this chapter, you did not have any sort of commentary tonight. So unless there was any objection, Mr. Chair, I think that pretty much should cover the concerns moving forward on this chapter for a text amendment.
We okay with that one? We okay with 10?
Yep.
Right.
And it has an enforcement provision in it.
There are enforcement provisions in it and talks of treating it as nuisances. And that is a pretty powerful tool that we have threatened to use, but thankfully have not had to use too much.
Right. Commissioner Wilcox, is that okay with you, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay, so we think we have our marching order. We'll get the definitions tidied up and the other marks as needed, and we will be, you guys can expect a hearing July 15th in addition with the other text and application from earlier tonight.
Okay.
Real quick note, we have a discussion item for the June 17th, 2020 meeting that kind of got resolved. That was the concern about whether or not you were going to be able to do a hearing on the 17th. That's been resolved, but a reminder now, you do have a meeting on the 17th and you do have a hearing scheduled for that. Irene will be leading that presentation for that night. So is it conditional use? Yeah, conditional use.
Okay, cool.
Department report, because it's already late, we'll try to keep it short and sweet. The Town Center Committee has been working very hard on some items. There will be probably an opportunity for this committee, or commission, I should say, to learn about some of that work. And we'll look forward to presenting it to you probably maybe in August, I would think.
Yeah.
It'll be around the time when you can see that. City is taking steps to try to help out the dining community in particular in downtown. There are now tables set up at Mayor's Square to allow for outdoor dining for restaurants, where restaurants can serve clients right outside. That effectively expands their dining capacity. We're also looking at the idea of parklets, which is basically taking up 1 or 2 parallel spaces on the historic highway and creating temporary seating spaces in certain areas. And a couple of property owners who do have some rear patio spaces have also contacted the city and let us know that, hey, we've got space if anybody else needs space. So, you know, this pandemic, pardon my French, sucks, but it has actually brought out a lot of good community spirit and creativity, that's a good way of putting it, in how we try to think and envision and help each other. So that's been very refreshing and delightful to see. So with every cloud, there is a silver lining. Irene, do you have anything you'd like to add from staff perspective?
Yeah, also in that meeting about the SDC, we had Beth Goodman came in and presented. And she gave the council some more information about the HNA that we have worked on last year. It seems that we're going to go ahead with another discussion about adopting the facts and then looking at the comp plan, but that will also go to you guys too, and we will keep you guys informed about the next updates on that.
Correct. Thank you for that reminder. That's a big one.
Okay. Pardon me?
Oh, nothing further.
And with that, Commissioner Wittering, anything? Okay. Commissioner Glantz?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Mamoni?
Nothing for me. No comments. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Wilcox?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Noticed at the Eagle Ridge complex, they have a driveway entrance off of 18th Way. I don't remember that being in the original plan. I thought it was just off of Cherry Park and 242nd. I'm glad to see it there.
Right now, there's a convenient water truck blocking the access. That is actually going to be a fire department or emergency vehicle access. It is not supposed to be a full lane access. They just have not installed the fire gate yet.
Oh, okay. That explains it. And my other question was Columbia Ridge up on Sturgis. Do you know what the marketing plan is for that, Chris? My impression is that they're just selling lots and going to build one house at a time.
Yeah, from my understanding, the last I've understood, a local developer, actually a team of 2 guys developed the site, and my understanding is they've sold half of the 26 lots, or I guess, 12 or 13 of those lots to a local home builder who has built in the region, and he has developed basically 3 prototypes that our staff have reviewed, and I wouldn't call it tract housing, but it's very similar style housing, and it would be that. Given the nature of how that subdivision is, which has alleys sort of for rear loading garages, there is a certain expectation of how the house would be oriented. And this gentleman's decided to buy half of it. I think he has the option to buy the other half, but that may also be retained by the original developer.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, who's left? Commissioner Weigel?
No, I have nothing except a motion to adjourn.
We're not there yet.
I second.
Hang on. No, not yet. Commissioner Prickett?
I don't have anything, but I second Marv's motion.
Okay, can we hold that for just a second?
Sure.
Okay, the housing needs analysis did come up. Council's working on that, and we are going to have some additional work to do on the strategies for that piece. The goals, the strategies, and the objectives will not be adopted.
Just the technical data.
Just the technical data. So we'll have a little bit more work to do on that. They want us to kind of work on that a little bit, and then that goes back, we'll go back to council.
But the horizon is the city will need to adopt it. So that's kind of the timeline set.
The Town Center Committee has been working hard, but I just want to say staff did a phenomenal presentation last night, and they're going to tweak it and get it ready to go out, and I think you guys will be very impressed with what we're thinking for down there. It's really impressive what our staff has done. So kudos to them. I have two other comments. One, the new traffic pattern at the east end of the Troutdale Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a traffic change, but again, when I was coming up here this evening, there was another accident there.
Another one.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
That's two that I've seen. I think there's been more than that, but two that I've actually stumbled onto personally. So I think that's an issue. The other thing is the Cochran Road where they built the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Have you driven on that?
No, not lately, no.
If you put your car into four-wheel drive, it's a little easier to go over it, but it's very, very rough.
Okay.
Through there.
Well, we can check with ODOT and
Because it's like, almost like
undulating.
sand or something, where it's these hills that you keep bumping over. Because before it used to be horrible with potholes and all that kind of stuff, which I would consider rough. But it's like, I don't know how they thought that was a smooth street.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will check in with ODOT on the first issue and with the county on the second one, because we'll be curious to see if they've noticed it too, and if they can do a fix.
Okay. All right. Now with that, we do have a motion
To adjourn.
and a second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Have a good
You
evening.
all too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Good night.
Bye.